Thank you for coming to this event. I'd like to open us with a few remarks. First of all, I want to thank the organizers for providing some time on today's MLK Serving Through STEM program for me to share remarks. I'm grateful to Dr. Ryan Kinzer in math, to Dr. Sarah Vigmestad and Ms. Kathy Kobrick, co-chairs of the College of Engineering DEI Council, for this invitation. I'm truly delighted to join you for this event. It is events such as these that highlight our commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion, as well as emphasize the significant work that we must do to advance the environment within our colleges and across our campus. In thinking about my introductory remarks, I was struck by the title of this session, Serving Through STEM. Serving and STEM. I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that service and STEM have not always been terms associated with each other. STEM work, teaching and research in particular, has for many years been about scientific outcomes. We produced research breakthroughs. We graduated engineers, mathematicians, and innovators. We transformed technologies by making them safer and more efficient. This is very much the world of STEM. But we cannot overlook the service that STEM provides to society. STEM improves quality of life through access to resources, care for the environment, and ethical approaches to science and engineering. As STEM educators, our service includes the training of the next generation, our connections to our local and global communities, and outreach that demonstrates the impact of our work in the real world. Our work is transformative for the betterment of people everywhere. That is most certainly our service through STEM. The University of Iowa is a unique campus in that we merge the work of what we might call hard science with a broad sense of liberal arts education and research. Speaking for engineering, we have collaborations with researchers across the entire campus, not just in medicine and public health, but also in the arts, humanities, and law. These collaborations ensure that engineering is at the core of solving pressing problems that are more than just scientific questions. Our engineering addresses issues of social justice, equity, and access through partnerships with colleagues across the campus. In short, serving through STEM is also about collaboration across the disciplines. Our service manifests itself in a recognition of our history. We know that STEM has not always been the most inclusive of fields, and we know we need to do better. Even before they become our students, how can we ensure that young girls and underrepresented students are encouraged to pursue STEM work? What can we do to focus our retention efforts, both for students and for faculty and staff, so that STEM disciplines are not only a place where people will want to come, but also where they will want to stay? How do we address the inequities that have perpetuated for generations through approaches and language, and then seek to make change? How do we break down hierarchies and silos that prevent us from seeing value in new and innovative approaches? Ultimately, serving through STEM is about advocating for change that is long overdue. Events like this one that bring us together today are certainly a start to these important conversations. But if our service through STEM is to be successful, we must continue this work after today. We must have difficult conversations about the shortcomings that have been a part of STEM culture. We must celebrate our successes, but remain vigilant in doing the work to enhance our academic communities. Without a doubt, STEM produces some of the brightest minds who have transformed not just specific technologies, but our entire way of living. STEM has forever changed how we travel, how we communicate, and how we learn. Understanding that these innovations don't occur in a vacuum and are a part of the very fabric of our society is at the core of serving through STEM. Thank you for this time to introduce the program. I will turn it over to you, Bria.
Excellent. And thank you very much, Dean Nemhard, for that excellent introduction. And thank you for the Planning Committee for creating this space to have a conversation, and to the panelists and the participants for your engagement over the next hour or so. So my name is Bria Marcello. I am in the Division of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, and I have the privilege to be the moderator for today's session. And so I hope that today you get to both witness and participate in that candid conversation. One that considers that the connections are just as much as maybe the possible misalignments for how service is or is not practiced, supported, valued, et cetera, within your disciplines. And so we do have some prepared questions and some slides to help the audience follow along, but we also hope that you will use the Q&A function to ask follow-ups or clarifications throughout today's session, and we'll insert those where we can, and then we'll also have time at the end of today's session to catch anything that we might have missed. And so one thing that's a tech thing to note is that we do have live transcript on. So if that's something that you would like to use, feel free to turn on your subtitles and for throughout today's session. So now, just as I have been welcomed, I have the distinct pleasure of introducing our panelists today. So our first panelist is Dr. Lori Adams. Dr. Adams is an associate professor of instruction in biology. Dr. Adams also serves as the co-director for the UI Lewis Stokes Alliance for Minority Participation Program and director of the Iowa Biosciences Academy and Latham Science Engagement Initiative. Currently, Dr. Adams has taken on additional roles of being the chair for the Department of Biology Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee. Welcome, Dr. Adams. Our next panelist is Dr. David Schwartney. Dr. Schwartney is a professor in civil and environmental engineering, and he's engaged with multiple community projects specific to resource-constrained communities. He serves as the director for the Center for Health Effects and Environmental Contamination, as well as the Environmental Policy Research Program in the Public Policy Center. Dr. Schwartney has continued his research through the Environmental Health Sciences Research Center. Welcome, Dr. Schwartney. Our next panelist is Dr. Colleen Mitchell. Dr. Mitchell is an associate professor in mathematics. She serves as the director of the Math Platoon and Sloan Center for Exemplary Mentoring Program. In addition, Dr. Mitchell is an advisor in the Iowa Biosciences Academy and has previously served as an active member of the Minority Student Recruitment and Development Committee. Welcome, Dr. Mitchell. And our final panelist today is Dr. Vincent Rogers. Dr. Rogers is a professor and director of graduate studies in physics and astronomy with an emphasis in string theory, particle theory, and gravitational theory research. Dr. Rogers also serves as the co-investigator and instructor in the Iowa Biosciences Academy and is a director for the UI Lewis Stokes Alliance for Minority Participation Program. Dr. Rogers also coordinates the Cafe Scientific, and Hawk Eyes on Science outreach programs. Dr. Rogers also has previously served as a tutor through the Multi-Ethnic Engineering and Science Association with the Iowa City Community School District. Welcome, Dr. Rogers. And so as part of the MLK celebrations and events, we wanted to ground our conversation in that same spirit. And so in that, this quote rose to the surface when thinking about this topic of service, STEM, and success. This idea that we're prone to judge success by the index of our salaries or the size of our automobiles, rather than the quality of our service and the relationships to mankind. What I would love to hear from the panelists is, when thinking about this quote, how does it compare to ways that success is judged in academic and scientific realms, particularly at places like the University of Iowa? So let's start with Dr. Rogers.
Well, let's just take the pandemic, for example. Here's an example where the true value of STEM actually manifests itself way past this idea of salaries and the size of your automobile. If you just take the medical workers, the type of mathematics and engineering which is needed to solve the pandemic, and all of these people are unnamed. There's so many people out there who are pretty much at the front line. They're unnamed, but it's really a STEM effort. Not only does STEM have to live with the problem, deal with it just like everyone else, but they have to solve it. They have to actually be the ones there who actually have to get their hands on the tools somehow and figure out what's going on. So I think it's a perfect example. And the idea that your salary is what matters is probably not as broad as we like to think. I remember my younger brother and I, when we were growing up, he's now an engineering professor. He and I would actually fight over how we best serve humankind. And I was always saying stuff like, it has to be done with fundamentally new ideas in areas like physics and, understand space and time and all this kind of stuff. And he was like, it has to be done more directly with engineering principles and things like this. So we actually turned out to be, I think we both think we're serving mankind, and I have my own opinion of that, whether he's doing a good job at it, but it's, he's an engineer and I'm a physicist. So it's, there's an example.
Thank you for that. Yeah, Dr. Schwartney.
I feel like as the engineer, I need to respond. No, I come at this very much from my discipline and the roots of environmental engineering in basically health and sanitation engineering. I mean, it used to be a much simpler field that was very clear in its role, that if we didn't keep our water resources clean, our air clean, the population suffered. I will admit that I feel like somewhere along the line with how academia is structured, we've kind of lost a little bit of our roots in that connection to society. And I think that's a shame. I've gotten far more comfortable engaging in that post tenure. I think that needs to be discussed. And I would wish we could find a way where junior faculty are so much more invested in this. I think they've come about at a different time. So many students these days have saw Flint and want to be involved in communities to sort of try to get at this environmental and social justice issues that tie so closely to what we do as engineers. I think we need to be thinking about creating institutional incentives, or at least acknowledging and rewarding getting people involved in this earlier, because like Dr. Rogers was saying, there are these connections. There's in some disciplines like mine are easy to see. We need to find ways to allow people to do that sooner. And I think that there are these worries about how we bean count in a traditional academic sense of does it count as much if we do that? And I think we need to be finding ways to make sure that it does, because I think it enriches so much about what we do and our mission at the university.
Absolutely. Yeah, Dr. Mitchell.
I was just going to chime in because, well, first of all, I laughed because my husband is an engineer. And so this sounds like a sort of common discussion in our household too, about, the contribution of the engineer and the contribution of the mathematician, or to try to solve the world's problems. But I guess I also wanted to chime in and talk about this idea of how we reward the work that we do in the institution. And I guess I can only speak very personally to my own experience of having a moment of letting it go, of deciding that the bean counters are going to count their beans, and whatever they count, they're going to count. But I'm going to take my own idea of what my mission is going to be. And as long as I'm staying on my mission, I'm going to call it success. So stay on mission.
And I'd love to echo that, Dr. Mitchell. I feel the same way. I think that sometimes it's easy to get caught up as someone who's most of my career is more towards service. And I took a bit of a turn from the traditional path of a professor to research one institution, since I primarily teach and I also work with mentoring programs and a lot of service. It was hard for me because, coming up through that culture of what is success? What does success mean? It means getting publications and grants and landing the professor position. And I had to really do some soul searching, but that inner voice inside that said, actually, this is part of your core value. You really do, and sort of keeping that in mind as I went forward, because success is defined, I think, slightly different. And often service isn't seen as something that you would do as a successful scientist, I guess. And so I do appreciate that. And I do want to point out one of the things that my colleague Vincent has reminded me of when I get a little bit frustrated is that it's about the students and sort of kind of also grounding yourself in that and who you serve. And I think that that's helpful to think about. It's not just about me and being recognized. It's about the students as well that we serve. So.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. And you mentioned, an audience member, and one of the question that came in around this specifically was, success sometimes will only work if you also have the support. So what would it look like, for deans and provosts to support, this, diversity, equity, inclusion component and evaluation of tenure? So maybe sharing a little bit about your experience with that, or if you have just kind of maybe just general comments on that as well.
Well, I think physicists are always looking for bodies in our subject, and physics, for example, is the one area where, for example, African Americans in the United States, that was the first degree that African Americans got a PhD in 1876. So it started the whole DEI effort, okay, long before it was cute to call it DEI and things like that. So, and physicists have always sort of embraced world thinkers all the time to try to bring people in, but it's a subject which is not necessarily popular, maybe because of the salary index thing or the automobile, I don't know, but I would say that one of the things universities are paying more attention to the fact is that the way people think in their different cultures and subcultures always helps STEM. And you can see that the way science has evolved from our planet, from deep in the roots of the Nile Valley of Africa, it's swarmed its way through the Mediterranean, through Rome, through China. What we call science today is extremely multicultural, and it doesn't come from a pocket full of smart guys at Caltech, okay? And that may be accidentally what we've fallen to prey, is that science has to come from some single place, but it historically has never worked that way. And we just have to come to grips with the fact that we need as many people, many players, many different kind of people to make the thinking for humans to move forward.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. Yeah, Dr. Adams.
I think one of the challenges when we think about recognizing this for promotion and tenure too with service is that it's hard sometimes to look at impact of some of the service initiative and how to measure that and quantify that. And I think that I've been on numerous committees that have talked about that. And it's just difficult, I guess, to, instead of a number of publications, look at the impact of someone's service work. But also providing enough opportunities for people that, want to get involved can. I mean, it seems like there's always opportunities, and yet maybe finding places to support and some of the effort, the extensive effort that's required to really launch successful service programs can be recognized as well.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. And that's a good segue actually into the next question.
Before you go to that question, let me just, never mind. You want to go ahead and.
Yeah, we'll come back to the one that's in the chat for sure. Yeah, because I think it's a good one, but it's also kind of connected, I think, to this idea too of access, right? And so at least in my mind, I think sometimes, what you've indicated is want or motivation to engage aren't the challenges. There might be some other things. So I would love, and just I'm kind of, I'd be curious to know what unique avenues and opportunities are there to serve for STEM educators and researchers broadly speaking. So let's start with Dr. Mitchell.
All right. So I guess I will say first, I paused when I heard that question because of the word unique. So I'm not sure I will succeed in unique opportunities, but I wanted to sort of step back and say, I feel like, at least for me, the problem is never that I don't have enough opportunities to serve, right? I feel like, in some sense, as you've heard a little bit already in this discussion, in some sense, everything that we do as scientists, as faculty, as engineers, as mathematicians, these are all in some sense a service. And so thinking about sort of pulling that apart a little bit more, how can we bring more service into what we already do and what we already love to do? So how do we bring more service into the research that we do? How can we think about, for me, that's a lot of attacking what I think are really urgent real world problems. So I'm an applied mathematician and I work in mathematical biology and mathematical physiology. And so I really want to understand heart disease. So looking for ways that through your research, you can work on problems that you feel are most impactful, can be a service. I think thinking about ways that your research can be a service in terms of the collaborative ties that you build across the institution and the country and the world. I also was thinking about how our service, our teaching is part of our service, right? Especially in the math department, we have a high contact number with undergraduate students. I teach a lot of engineers. I teach a lot of undergraduates in other majors. And so in a place where there are so many underserved populations, I sort of have this vision of like, not just one leaky pipeline, but many leaky pipelines with many leaks. And so wherever you are, like, put a finger on one of them. When you're in a classroom with your undergraduate students, how can you be more service to those students? I think that's something we'll talk about more as we go along. When you are mentoring your graduate students, how can you be a better mentor to those graduate students and pull them into that community of service? And I think, a lot of the things, obviously the things that get called service, there's lots of opportunities for service. But again, I want to think about how those things are part of who we already are. So we're already serving on a committee. How can we be the positive voice? How can we be an affirmative voice for DEI values? How can we bring more people into the conversation in that moment where we're already doing what we're doing? So I'm not sure I really answered that question, except to say there's opportunities everywhere and so many places where we can have an impact. And so pick your place. I've always felt for myself, I've put a lot of my energy into graduate education. I feel like that's such a key sort of node in the system to bring in great graduate students and help them also evolve into great engaged scientists who are going to go out into the world. But wherever you are, find where you can be involved.
Absolutely. Thanks, Dr. Mitchell. Other thoughts from the panelists around ways? Yeah, Dr. Rogers, please.
I like to chime in also with Colleen. Colleen, don't underestimate the value of thinking even abstractly about mathematics, what that does to the human being. I mean, it's one thing to actually produce mathematics, which will solve an engineering problem, which is very wonderful and everything like this, but mathematics, by coming in abstractly, let me give you a point. Okay, the abstract mathematics which we use to understand quantum mechanics today, which describes things like lasers and quantum communication in 2021, was developed 200 years before quantum mechanics even existed. Well, 100 years before quantum mechanics existed, because that abstract thinking was allowed to flourish there. And so I think that the other thing that STEM does, it gives you, it's big in the sense that humans really do want to think about the really, really big stuff. They really do want to know, what is this universe we live in? What is the, and you know, those big questions the university can bring to the table, and they're not asking you to pay a price for it. You're not paying more money to, well, here's the big thinking classes, and here's the classes where they're just going to get you through a job at wherever you want to work. But we're bringing it all to the table. So we're serving the human mindset in a very different way than you can from just, you know, saying that I want you to repeat after me. This is what I taught you. And this week, we actually teach students to be creative, and that creative work lingers on, and it affects future generations in a way which we will never know how it affects things.
Okay, I have to respond back and say, yay, right? I'm actually, this is sort of an aside, but right now teaching for the first time a general education quantitative reasoning course in math. And so taking a step back and really thinking about how to show students mathematical thinking.
I mean, the popularity of words like black holes, and you know, you look at some of the stuff which shows up in music nowadays. It's like music. It's complicated. It's hard. Who really knows how to play a musical instrument? But every one of us likes that stuff, okay? Because it allows us to think differently. You know, I cannot play music that you want to hear, but I can at least do I can do stuff where the mathematics leads to beautiful stuff like planes flying, you know, lasers working, you know, quantum mechanics, liquid nitrogen flowing up a side of a glass. You know, those kind of things are still fascinating, and the whole world should be part of that, not just a tiny piece of it.
I wonder too, I think this conversation, and then, yeah, go ahead first, David, Dr. Schwarney.
I mean, thinking of it from the lens of engineering, I mean, in a sort of the expertise that I have, and I guess we're fortunate in some ways in that, like, water connects everybody, and we have a lot of strengths in water research here at the University of Iowa. And so I think just more generally as that example, I mean, engineers have the opportunity to use their expertise to benefit others. They really do. And if you have the privilege of the resource where you can create that opportunity, bringing other people along with you. And so, you know, we've, through the Center for the Cheek, we've been testing lead in schools. And it's something that a few of us on campus here at the university, Michelle Scherer included, were really eager to do that. Filling a void. And I think what probably gives us the most enthusiasm about doing that is the student volunteers, the graduate students, the undergraduates that want to come along with us. And, you know, so, you know, for me, it's about expending what using what I can to enable that for others so that they've had that chance to go into the schools. And, you know, you got to get up at 6 a.m. and do these things, because just depending on how you sample. But so I think it's just finding those opportunities of listening to communities, listening to other populations, you know, listen to the people of what their needs are. And so being a good listener has to be a part of doing service in this area, or thinking about these issues beyond the university. And then just trying to figure out, you know, where you're comfortable making your impact. You know, Lori mentioned impact, and I think that's it. It's about, where do you feel like you want to use your expertise? But I think it's absolutely critical for people that are in positions to start that sort of thing is to build it for others too, right? You know, it's critical for us that we give our students those chances to see it, so it's just second nature to them, and that there isn't a barrier to doing it as they go forward. So just thought I would chime in on that front.
Can I just add to that too? I guess speaking more as a STEM educator right now, as opposed to a researcher, I also want to say, in terms of impact, that I think something that often goes unrecognized and it is hard to articulate, but cannot be underestimated, are the day-to-day little acts of service, as I would call them, with mentoring students that you have, demystifying what an academic institution is, and talking about, I think oftentimes students don't realize, and I know I didn't realize, how do these academic institutions work, and the fact that we work in such a place where we have expertise all over the place, in so many different areas. And I think just those little moments of work, listening again, but listening to the student and helping to connect them with people on campus. I think those little things can actually have a very large impact. So just kind of adding to the conversation there. And then so many opportunities with K-12 interface and doing outreach in the local schools and areas. I think there's a lot of great connections that we have working with the College of Education and others doing outreach. So.
Do you want to respond, Dr. Schwartney?
Well, I was just going to bring up the pipeline building and K-12 outreach, but Lori hit it right on the nail on the head. So perfect.
Excellent. Well, and this conversation for me, I think about the conversation around success, and then this one here around opportunities. And you've mentioned some things that are really tangible, it seems like, in measurement, but some other things that are a little bit more abstract, right? And so a question from the audience was around how do you externally measure success? And I think that's even more important in some of those abstract service pieces that you're working through. So I'd be curious kind of how you're thinking about that.
It's very difficult. In fact, some of the outreach that we did at physics department, as well as with biology department, where you go in and you work with K through 12, you show them demos, you show them all this cool stuff. But if you were to ask someone, is this worthy of, say, the tenure decision at a university, it's difficult for them to wrap their head around it if you're thinking in terms of the original quote that Martin Luther King just mentioned, in terms of profitability. Because the scientist and the engineer are thinking, and the mathematician are thinking, they're serving the community. They're serving a much broader world, just to make people see that you're actually a part of this scientific structure which we have. But if you ask, well, then how many of those students actually came to our institution? Okay, it may take 10 to 12, 15 years before you answer that. If you talk about a K through 12 kid, it's okay, anyway. I hate to think that the 12 takes another 50, but it could. Okay, but it's one of those questions that we don't have a rubric to necessarily measure success, which is like a quarterly report for what makes business easy in that sense is it's money. It's a simple thing which you can count. But what goes on for the rest of our human experience is not always that easy to count. We can measure joules of energy you've expended. We can measure your temperature. We can measure so many things, but in everyone's everyday life, they can't tell how much someone loves them and put a number by it. It's not there's so many things that are not measurable, which we have to face, that we live with every day. So I would say that that's part of what the STEM experience is, to tell you what you can measure and what you can't.
Thank you for that. Other panelists, thoughts there? I know it's a big one, and I think you don't have to have any thoughts, because I think for me, one thing that this is bringing up as well is this idea of measurements and outcomes. And I think that I sometimes think about service work, and I think about this idea, right? So like when we think about service initiatives, and we found that service in its many forms can become narrow, right, in scope, and maybe sometimes even paternalistic at times, because you have this emphasis on the populations that you're serving, which of course you need to do, but then also how do you fit into that narrative, I think comes up a bit as well. So I would be curious to know, kind of expanding on this idea of outcomes and service, is what ways does serving in STEM benefit also the educator and researcher to carry out that service? So I think about that, also in the wider STEM community. So maybe let's start with Dr. Adams on this one.
Thanks. Yeah. So speaking in terms of the benefits to me as an educator, again, I got here about 10 or 11 years ago, and I found myself, I'd made a bit of a transition again from that traditional research career path, and really my passion was in teaching and mentoring. And so I was seeking out as many service opportunities as I could find because I wanted to get involved. And I found that there, a lot of people didn't have the bandwidth for them. So everybody was sure, yeah, you can sit on that committee. And at some point, I know several people were remarking, why are you saying yes to all this stuff that you're not really getting paid to do at all? And but I wanted to get involved, and I also found that it was a very great way to expand my network of people and really understand a problem from a lot of different angles. And so, for example, if I was interested, and I'm very interested in the transfer student process of transferring from another 2-year institution to 4, and really not understanding that problem. But the more service you do, the more you get to know instructors at community colleges, the students who are transferring in, the instructors who are teaching courses that the students are transferring in, the more committees you serve on to hear all of the different angles of this issue, the broader perspective you have. And I don't think I would have near the perspective I do have if I had not served on so many different committees. And that said, I think at some point you do get yourself spread too thin, and you have to ask, and I would ask myself on committees, am I able to contribute to this committee in a meaningful way or not? And if I really can't see a way that I can meaningfully contribute, then I go away. But at the beginning, for me especially, I found that this is a fantastic way to understand all levels of the university and outside of the sphere of the university as well. So I served on some initiatives that were the governor's STEM initiative that worked with people from different universities and colleges all across the state. So to me, service, and in some weird way, I actually felt guilty. Like, I am benefiting so much from this service, which is probably really bizarre to think about, but it was something that was on my mind, that I felt like I personally was benefiting from it, but I was also carrying out service as well. But again, I think it does help you really understand a complex issue a lot better the more service you have around that issue.
Absolutely. Yeah, go ahead, Dr. Rogers.
So I used to be the director of the Iowa Bioscience Academy a long time ago, long before Lori was born. And at one point, it's sort of a volunteer service. There's not like a lot of money which goes to principal investigators for these programs, okay? But it was Lori who would come to us when she first got here at the University of Iowa and keep banging on our door. Hey, this idea, that idea. So I thought she was a seasoned professor with tenure, because well protected, because she wants to do all this service stuff, okay? And we were just sucking up these ideas left, right, and center. And that's why I proposed to her to be the co-director later on, when I discovered she's just this person who just literally got on campus, filling in this crack that our university needs, okay? There's this glue which is holding the university together, and it's from all this service that faculty are always doing. And it's really difficult to quantify. I mean, we get these sheets that tell us how many minutes did we do this, how many minutes did we do that kind of thing. And faculty really rack their brain how to squeeze themselves into these rubrics, okay? And this is an example of where that STEM actually is helping us to think deeply about our own institution, about what it needs, okay, as well. And the other quick thing I'll say is that when you do K through 12 outreach and you do public engagement, the public tells you questions, asks you questions sometimes, and you walk away and you say, dang, why is that true? And then you start to formulate in your head, and you realize that stuff that you were supposed to learn as an undergraduate, it makes sense to you what the real answer, or you come up with a new idea, or it stimulates creativity when you have questions from the curious, who are everybody out there.
Thank you. Yeah, Dr. Shortney.
I mean, I think building on what Dr. Adams, Dr. Rogers have said is, you learn that not all problems have a technical solution. As an engineer, you kind of want to come at this and think I can build a widget that's going to fix everything. Some problems don't have that, right? So they're solutions that involve people, that are social, political. You don't really learn that until you're out kind of tackling these other issues in these opportunities that service or engagement can present. You learn collaboration, you learn communication, you learn empathy. One of the things Michelle, Sharon, and I have talked about a lot is like, we just need to be developing more and more engineers these days that have empathy, that can think about, the people that they're ultimately working for, whether it's in different sectors, but that, hearing the problems and being better in our profession by responding to that rather than assuming we know and then plopping it on them. So it's incredibly enriching, and we need to find more ways to get more people involved in these types of efforts and activities, because it's I think it's one of the biggest ways you can grow professionally, to think about how it stretches you and what it forces you to sort of work at the edge of your comfort zones and beyond, and really value other disciplines. You hear about convergence and interdisciplinarity, and you don't do that unless you're out in taking on these types of these challenges.
Yeah, go ahead, Dr. Mitchell.
Yeah, so I'm really just gonna chime in and agree with with everything that everyone just said, and just I love the makes you a better collaborator and makes you a better communicator. People talk so much. We had a moment even when we arrived as panelists here to realize that without our service, we wouldn't all get to know each other, right? So the networking, the reaching across disciplines has sort of deepened our experience, I guess, in a lot of ways. And then I loved what you said, Dr. Rogers, about questions from the curious. That one of the absolutely most fun things for me, and again, this is me being selfish in my service, that one of the most fun things for me, working with all of the Sloan scholars. So these are graduate students that are from all different disciplines all across the institution in STEM, but was engaging and talking to each of them about what they're interested in and what they're researching. And what they all have in common is that beautiful curiosity. And then the other thing I would just chime in and say that I feel that I really benefit from as a researcher is sort of related to that questions from the curious, that those students and those collaborations, they just bring the enthusiasm, they bring the new ideas, they really keep me motivated to stay engaged.
And I must say that it's the curious actually, which gives us far more value. We feel very valued because of this curiosity out there. It's there, and you can see it all the time. And okay, there's pay raises and things like that, but there's that genuine appreciation by people who are curious about what's going on is extremely valuable.
Well, you've got some curious folks also in the audience here too, who want to elaborate a little bit more on this conversation about outcomes. And it's a good question. And so with some context, so I just want to read it out actually verbatim. It says, it seems to me that the growing emphasis on outcomes and measurement of impact, while important in some sense, is somewhat short-sighted. It tends to dilute the importance of long-term impacting contributions in the basic sciences. My impression is the world is moving too much towards immediate returns. Any comments? We hear from a couple of the panelists on that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And like I said, I know this is partly coming from a place of great privilege as a faculty member with tenure, but to be able to take a moment and like I said, let go of the immediate bean counter, what's going to be measured, and really focus on what is my mission. That's really a blessing, and the more we can stay on mission, the happier we'll all be, and the more impact we'll all have, whether it's measured or not.
It's an academy, and let me put it to you like this, though, Bria. If I could probably score extremely high on a lot of these rubrics for what determines me doing well, and my students won't like me at all. Okay, they will see you as still missing the point of what it means to be a good educator. But you could check off box after box, but what we are interested in is how our students see us and whether we're communicating with our students. And it's very difficult to check off a box and say, I've made contact with this student today, okay, and help them appreciate the Sturm-Liouville equation, whatever it may be. Okay, what do you do? There's no box like that, but that's what students appreciate.
Absolutely. And I think that that's actually a great segue to the next question, right? Because we've talked about generally, but also this idea of students. And, to your very point, Dr. Rogers, each of our students have a number of intersecting identities that impact their experience, and they want to be able to engage with you around that too. And so as previous students yourselves, and now in the roles of faculty, I'd be curious if you could share something that you learned about intersectionality in STEM, education, research, et cetera. So let's start with Dr. Schwartney.
Sure. I guess I would say that from my perspective, I've come to really sort of appreciate and value how much that lived experience of these students that have that intersectionality enrich and really drive change in our programs. And maybe that's, in some ways, I realize that's incredibly unfair because they're already coming with so much to extra barriers to getting them to where they are. So engineering, women are underrepresented. Maybe that's true across all STEM disciplines, but I know in engineering it's true. And then if you think about women of color, and so it's that much harder. We don't have the role models for them. We struggle with this in here at the University of Iowa and our engineering department. Civil and environmental engineering should be this. We're seeing great diverse student populations, faculty populations. And so I think, the other thing that I'm constantly knowing you've got to work to do more to build space for them, to build an environment for them, because we need to make sure that they see opportunities. And I think that's because once we get them here in the classroom, in the laboratories, in the communities, it's everything that we need in terms of bringing diverse thought together to solve real challenges and problems. So yeah, I don't know how eloquent of an answer that is. I hope I'm getting at it, but I guess I would say is we need to be thinking about ways in STEM generally and in engineering specifically to make sure there's a home for people that come from all of these different perspectives. Because right now, I know, Dean Nemhart talked about how we've got some issues that we have to deal with. This would be one of them to me, that if we get an African-American woman who wants to come here, that they can see professors. And it's great that we have Dean Nemhart here, but we need more of that. We need to give them these opportunities and figure out how we can build environments for them to thrive.
Thanks. Yeah, Dr. Adams and then Dr. Rogers.
Yeah, and I thought about this question a little bit differently, but I think one thing that I thought about it in terms of what I've learned in terms of challenges and then in terms of benefits to intersectionality. And I think a challenge that and something I learned that's challenging is that you can't always make assumptions about which identity is most salient to someone because of this intersectionality. It depends on, it can often be situational. And so when I'm working with students, I'm always reminding myself, there's so many aspects to identity, and don't make assumptions. And there's many aspects of identity to a student's identity that we don't know, that aren't visible to us. And so just always constantly reminding myself not to assume anything. But I think a benefit of intersectionality and holding all these multiple identities is that, you can often try to find common ground with someone who is different from you because of that. And if it depends, and, developing comfort over time and getting to know students. But anyway, that's how I thought about this question in terms of things that I've learned and challenges and benefits. And then I guess I didn't want to speak for other students' experiences, but my own personal experiences. I share identities, one as a working mom and also one from coming from a rural background. And I've just done my own self-awareness raising that just because I hold these identities doesn't mean I automatically identify with all working moms and all people from rural backgrounds. But we do share some common experiences. And that's just, again, my own intersecting identities that sometimes are salient in certain situations and sometimes not. And then with respect to mentoring, I know this question's out there in the literature a lot, and as a white female leading several programs that are for underrepresented minorities identities, which I don't identify with, I've often had to think about, what are you doing? And what is your role here? But I have found that it's going to be important to some students, and it's very student dependent on whether you share the same identity or not. But in many situations, you can still be an effective mentor and share very different identities. So that's what I've learned.
So yeah, thank you both for that. I mean, I appreciate that. As a student, I was in a physics department at the University of Dayton in Dayton, Ohio, as and I was probably the only Black physics student within a bomb blast of that school. But it was interesting that I did have a mentor, and the mentor I had was a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant guy who I still talk to today. I just called him the other day because he just had a stroke, and we usually talk once or twice a month. But I remember the day I realized he was my mentor, and I'll tell you that story. I was working in his lab for gamma X-ray angular correlations, and I'm laying out some line to figure out how to. Back in the old days, you had to figure out all kinds of clever engineering ways to what you can do now on a computer. And he was asking me, what do you want? What do you want to do? This guy is a pipe smoking guy who went to Canada, who even had sort of an English accent, which you sort of just like, okay. And then and I said, well, I want to be a physicist. And he says, well, there's only one person that I really can think of who's going to be a physicist in your class. And I said, well, who is that? He goes, well, it's you. And I said, well, why would it be me? I'm struggling to keep a B plus. And he says that, well, you know how to take the pain. We physics is painful. This is like athletics. You know how to take the pain. You just keep right on coming. And so, that's how I know you're going to make it. You can handle the hard work. You can handle the loneliness of being the only guy here, but you just keep right on going. You'll be fine. You'll be a physicist. Put his pipe back in his mouth and started smoking and started showing me some other stuff and I realized that this guy didn't just see me as a student, but he saw me as a protege. And that's sort of where he didn't care about how overweight I was or Black I was. He just saw me as this guy I want. He's a thinker. He's my protege. And a lot of times as faculty, we have to see students. When we see students, we can't just figure out and say, well, that's a white female from Iowa, so she'll never be my protege kind of thing, because I'm an overweight Black guy who she can gravitate around if dropped in a potential the gravitational well. So I sort of have gone as far as I can from sort of looking right into the head, the skull of a person to see exactly where they're coming from. It's really hard to do, but that's how we have to think. And one of the reasons I asked Lori to be a director of the IBA was not because I didn't realize she had this rural background, or maybe that would have changed. Never mind. But the point is that I just like the way she thought of the student as proteges, as people who will take the baton from us. We got to die at some point, and someone's got to take the science and move it forward later on anyway from beyond us. And so that's what we got to concentrate on our next generation as well. And they come in all kinds of packages.
Yeah, maybe I'll just chime in and hit some of those themes again and say, that each of our students brings lots of different identities. And sometimes when you're engaging with a new student, one of the things you want to do is find some common ground. And sort of as a theme here, sometimes that common ground is exactly that they're thinkers. That's what you just said, that's right, was to engage with them as thinkers, engage with them as curious future scientists. And then as the relationship grows, maybe some of the other identities will become part of the conversation.
Yeah, no, thank you all very much. And, one thing that's showing up, at least from the participants too, is this idea of you have intersectionality and you want to be able to engage with all those identities. And though the experience could be different long-term, right, with what you're trying to achieve, be it in education or research. And, a question from the group is around, this ability to stay on mission. Is that a privilege or not, right? So very specifically, it says, the cost of staying on mission. So thinking about things like education, research, tenure, et cetera, especially for URM scholars and teachers and grad students, is much higher than for our white colleagues. So how can we strategize that cost so that it's survivable? thoughts from folks here.
That's hard.
Could you put something in writing? I can't even read what.
Yeah. I can go back to it too, and I can also stick it in the chat for you all to see as well. But yeah, just thinking about this idea of an imbalance of, you know, cost especially when it comes to things like service and tenure, but then also trying to do your research and teaching and education.
So yes, I will just say it is absolutely a huge privilege. It is a huge privilege to have the chance to try to stay on mission, right? To make that space where you can decide what's important to you and focus on it, and absolutely acknowledging that even among academics, we do not all have the same privilege there.
And I'll echo that and basically say that first things first is we need more people that are white acknowledging that there is this difference because it's there. And then being willing to say we have to change this and figuring, I mean, how, which is the question, how to strategize the cost so that's survivable. I don't know that I have an answer for that, a good one, but I do know that we need it. To me, it seems like we got to acknowledge it and be willing to work on it in everybody. It has to be cultural. It has to be in everybody. And I don't know that we're there. I know we're not there. But we need to figure out by how to have the conversations, how to bring it up, how to help the people we can and our colleagues that we know we're carrying that extra burden, and do what we can to take that burden off them. Again, I wish I could think of a way very tangible and concrete. But what I will want to do is my part. And I think it's acknowledging the incredible privilege I have and all the different places in my life. Whether, you know, and that I've gotten to do the things I can do by whether I want to, you know, by having that. Absolutely. And I have to pay that back. I have to find out my own ways. And I think we all need to take that on for those of us that have that privilege. We all have to be willing to say whether we've taken advantage of that. We have taken advantage of these systems and we can't do it anymore. And we have to make sure that we're pulling the others along and letting them have that too. So, you know, is it things like taking on extra committee work? Let's talk, talk about faculty members, taking on the extra committee work, doing what you can to shield people, figuring out where there are opportunities you can work with folks to help build their research programs, taking on, writing the training grants so you can mentor the students so that you can get more people in the door. It's just going to we got to be willing to do more to level the playing field. We have to.
Well, one of the things that may go back to a couple of pages before, you're asking about what is valued by the quarterly reports of the university. And one of the things I noticed, even as a postdoc at Stony Brook and University of Florida, is that universities don't stop you from doing service. They may not give you credit for it, but they don't stop you from doing it. And so, I mean, one of the reasons I started doing outreach and public engagement, there was no line item that said, and by the way, you're going to get so many points for this, okay? And if you look at the members of this board, of this panel, almost all of them are not necessarily starting these things because it's a big pay raise or a big it's not at all. It's in fact the university wants it, and they probably just don't know how to measure it, just like we were saying before, but they still want it. And I would just say that there's people who are going to be on the vanguard of how the university is going to respond to things in the future, and the university will look back at these days, these times, and say, yeah, this was really important for us because 20 years later, a bunch of new thinking people came to our campus. I don't know what it will lead to, but I think that the university doesn't stop us from doing good things. And so, but there are people who have cleverly figured out how to check off the right boxes, and they look more valued, but I'm not so sure in the long run what that really means. So
Yeah, thank you. And I think that this, this question from the audience, and then also, I'm thinking about even the next question that we have for you too is, what can individuals do and be aware of for themselves? But then also realize how that could, at any point in time actually be reinforcing something, right? So a policy, a practice, the language, what you're using. We talk a lot in my office about how, if you're unwilling to acknowledge that we have these different implicit associations, that there is a history of inequity, and we rely on both of those things, even if we're told to be impartial, right? Especially in things like in sciences. That if you don't engage with that truth, especially as educators, you can just reinforce those existing social hierarchies and injustices. So I would love to dive more into this idea, like to think and maybe even complicate that understanding of how service, especially for you, has been or could be a critical piece of having really a more diverse, inclusive, and equitable approach to education. So what that looks like in meetings. So whoever would like to start, feel free.
Freedom. Wow. Well, I think that it sounds like you're asking what we were just sort of speaking on, is that this idea is being evolving right now through the university ranks of, they're seeing the value of it. They see the students value these things, and not just the underrepresented students, not just women students, but students in general want to be among the world. They want to know the world. They don't want to be felt like they're left out and belong to just a particular cluster. People want to be world citizens. A vast majority of them do. We focus a lot of times on some of those people who don't, but that's not the student who really wants to see the world, be part of the world, be part of a bigger process. And I think universities are realizing that in a much more serious way. But it's just, in my mind, it's just hard to wrap your head around it when the FNA cost from a grant, okay, brought in so much money. Let's put it this way. Okay.
I mean, coming at this slightly different way, perhaps, but when I think of doing work, service, or engagement, things that stick with me are actually the things that are the hard. It's humbling when you find things that you can't solve, when you can't help people. So it's that realizing you don't always have the answers, that you need others. That you recognize your privilege because you didn't have to deal with the people you're trying to maybe interact with had to deal with. And I think all of that, where you're interacting with more people and realize, like, damn, I got to, I need to understand that there are chances where, we need to work together to solve these issues. It says my internet connection is unstable, so I'm sorry if I'm chopping up. But for me, I think the thing about this is this work there are parts to it that are incredibly humbling. And if you ever think you're an academic that knows all the answers and is, got your numbers, your Google Scholar profile, and you've got it all figured out, it's the best way to realize you don't. And I think our students could benefit from that when they get these types of experiences, that there's more to it. And that you need to understand what others go through, and you need to be willing to want to work with others to find that, those solutions forward where everybody benefits. Because if you get stuck in your own bubble doing it, you're going to miss all that.
I could add to this. And again, I took the perspective. I really like this question about thinking about taking on an attitude of service. And as an educator, I thought about it in this way. As I said before, I know one of my reminders that was given to me here by Dr. Rogers, but I often am telling myself it's about the students. So I serve the students. So I'm taking on that mindset or that attitude of service when I'm teaching. And if I only see myself as an instructor, that it's just getting the job done, so I'm getting up there and delivering my material and I'm assessing the students, I do think we do contribute to reinforcing those set hierarchies and injustices. And so my thought is that, as an educator, if you think there's only one way to deliver content and assess performance, we're not learning from you're a missed opportunity to learn from your students, and to also help you grow as an instructor. And one of the things that I was kind of thinking about here is that curiosity. I know we've talked about curiosity in a number of contexts, but I think in the context of learning, I think about it in the lab as well, but in the classroom, it's such a powerful motivator. But if we're only delivering material in one way, students aren't allowed to, I guess, experience the content and kind of bring in their own experience with the subject matter. So I think about it in the classroom in terms of having this balance between providing content, but also students can explore the connections they have with that content, if that makes sense. So I guess I'm going a bit in circles, but getting back to this idea of taking on an attitude of service in our teaching. And if we think about who we're serving as the students, and it's not just this one-way delivery of material and assessment, but we're looking at it in the sense of how does the student interact with that material and how do they become motivated? It's going to be different for different students, and the intersectionality for one example, but everybody has different experiences. And I think that there's room for this innovation in the classroom. Now, if the next question is, what does that look like? I don't know, but I think it's providing students some freedom and flexibility. I get this joy of doing this with these Latham Science Engagement students where they have their own independent projects and they really just let them loose with their ideas and their creativity. And then they go out into the community and do a project of their own design. And so that's kind of, if you ask me for a specific on what does that actually look like, Lori, I think that can be really a powerful way for students to connect and learn and be motivated to continue to learn. So
it's a hard thing to ask faculty to pay deeply attention to their students. And if you tell faculty we're not going to really pay you anymore for paying attention to why that student, why Sally or Johnny is not quite getting it, then just give them the grade and move on. Then that's what you're asking is you're asking faculty as well as staff to value students at a much deeper level than just can be. It's easy to teach students who practically know everything already because they could have gone anywhere in the university, anywhere in the universe for school. But that's not everybody. That's not anybody almost. And when you have an idea of service in your head, you're serving, and we do think of service as a lot less pay, right? When you hear the word service, the knee-jerk reaction is servitude, and that automatically means you're going to get paid less. So, but the university wants us to have this service, I think, as an entity. Although it's really hard to even teach faculty how to get into the heads of other students, and I don't know how you're going to go about it, but it should be valued far more.
Yeah, and that's something, that has, come up in some of the questions from the attendees as well, is acknowledging that, one, going back to that disproportional element of that URM faculty tend to volunteer for service acts even more. Even folks on this call, right, have also volunteered that extra time. So I'd be curious to know, thinking about that, this idea that you're mentioning, Dr. Rogers, too, around service not weighing as much as teaching and research, even if it's core to you. How do you all negotiate that, especially with a lot of the opinions from others who are going to determine whether or not you're getting tenure, where implicit bias is really rampant, and specifically that in this case, as the participant indicated here, that URM faculty suffer both ways because of unrecognized accomplishments, specifically in service.
I think that you really need to be paying attention to candidates for faculty who have a record or have some interest in this idea of service. I think that should be one way you can handle it is ask, what is our candidates doing to provide service so far in their career? And what element are they providing service? Other than the easy things in terms of the dollar signs. And we're doing more of that, actually. More of our faculty candidates are chosen for their ability to be interested in mentorship Are they taking mentor training and things like this? And are they actually putting themselves in a situation where they have to pay attention to stuff which is not necessarily in their world? And in STEM, we have to, because it's super international, first of all, and we don't have a choice to just pick big guys like me, and me and my twin brother don't form enough of a cadre of people to be a scientist. You know, it's so I think that we're looking for people with personality, a certain personality now as well. It's part of the job requirement, I think.
Yeah, go ahead, Dr. Schwarman.
To the comment from the audience, I think we do need to think about how in tenure decisions and any promotion and decision that we value service more and we value DEI more. So first and foremost, I think everybody on this call would probably agree with that when we have this structure in place, that it puts all of its emphasis on these outside letters and these numbers, and then there's the potential for the implicit bias that is well documented through that process. And yet we are saying as an institution, we value these principles. Well, we need to then put our money where our mouth is and start figuring out ways in which we can credit people, because there are folks that are forced to do disproportionate amount of service, as a result of their URM status. The other thing we should be working to do is figuring out ways where we can create a culture where we can get more URM faculty here and make them want to stay here, so that there are so few that have to then handle that burden of always being asked to be on those committees. None of this is easy, but I mean, I think some of the institutional changes that need to happen to say, where if we value this, then we need to make sure that our committees that are evaluating people's contributions at the university are looking at things more holistically. And I guess what I would encourage anybody that like me as a full professor, white faculty, I need to be in those tenure decision discussions, talking about that and advocating for that to be weighed more, and pushing back when you have a colleague that says, oh, but this letter says this, so I would encourage anybody that's in my position to speak up. Like, we have to do more of that, and we need to hold our colleagues accountable for not doing that. If we sit there and we let people have an unfair, get a disadvantage by having to serve more because of, we need to be willing to fight for them, right? We need to be willing to speak up, and then we need to be willing to try to figure out ways in which we can change the culture here so that doesn't happen. But it is happening, and we need to acknowledge it. And I wish that as a university, we could say, well, we're going to change this, and we're going to start weighing things differently when it comes to tenure and promotion decisions, because we do value these principles that we say are our core.
Well, I wonder, thinking about, what both you and Dr. Rogers have brought up, right? This idea of what the culture is now, but then what it also is like we're inviting folks into the space as well. And maybe Dr. Adams and Dr. Mitchell can elaborate on this. A question from the audience was around, what does it look like to have these things around service statements and teaching statements and research statements, and is even on the entry point, is that something that can be a successful strategy, in starting at least that conversation before someone's on campus?
I'm not sure I'm going to answer exactly that question. But I guess the thought that sort of went through my mind was, we all know that URM faculty have this additional time burden, I guess, that asked to be on more committees, asked to do more service work. And I guess I just want to take a reminder and say, I really feel like it's important that the message to the culture, to the whole institution, be that this is all of our jobs. It is all of our jobs to be advocates for diversity, equity, and inclusion. And it is all of our jobs to do that in the things that we already do. It is already our jobs to do that in the classroom. It is already our job to do that as mentors. It is already a job to do that as researchers. It is already our job to do that on all the committees that we're in. And so, in some sense, part of the solution in the short term, until we can have a much more diverse faculty, is to realize that this has to be a priority for all of us as we go forward. I answered a different question, but.
And I completely I would agree with everything you have to say. And then the only thing I would add is I think something that could be relatively simple is a way to really acknowledge all of the informal mentoring that underrepresented faculty do. I think that, you know, it's easier to see maybe on if you're just looking, I'm doing this from a very practical perspective, but you're looking at a candidate's CV and maybe they do have a service statement. But I think acknowledging that underrepresented faculty are oftentimes asked to be mentors for other underrepresented students. And somehow I think that gets lost. And that's an incredible amount of time that should be acknowledged as service. And it's not just the number of committees that you sit on. I'm just thinking this is a very practical little thing, but I think it could be implemented fairly quick. I mean, just to be able to acknowledge that happens and it's not trivial amount of work to mentor other students. And it's not just somebody in your own research group, it'll be, you know, students across campus or whatever. And so I think that needs to be recognized.
Absolutely. Well, thank you all. I mean, one thing that's happened is time has just flown by, at least for me and the position that I'm in, and we're creeping up on time. As we want to be able to offer at least a more of an open section for anybody who has some additional questions, just for any of the panelists to respond to based on something that they've shared today or on something that you're just curious that you're hoping that they might be able to respond to. So we'll wait for just a moment to see if we get any of those questions and then we'll go from there. And feel free to, you know, as we're sitting here, if there is something that you wanted to elaborate on or that you were like, this brought up this other thought, feel free to just kind of add in here based on the conversation today. You might have answered all the questions ever necessary to think about serving some together.
I did want to comment on this idea of service. The faculty at a university have 3 tiers that they have to perform very well at. That's teaching, research, and service. And but for a while, for example, if you just went to a faculty senate meeting and even fell asleep in the meeting, okay, you got more credit than someone who would go do K through 12 outreach programs, say 50 of them in a year. Because there was just this idea of so what you have to ask what kind of outside pressures are on the university to determine whether they're accreditable, if that makes sense. Okay. In other words, what do our peers think of us? So this peer pressure of asking URM faculty to do things, for example, is bigger than just the faculty at our university. It's a world phenomenon. It's huge. I was at the Mathematical Sciences Research Institute, and they were talking about it's in Berkeley, California. It's the University of California, Berkeley, and I was talking to the director about, and he was telling me about how, well, he's concerned that what the other people think if they have more underrepresented or Black faculty show up whether they're losing their standards or something. And so the question of standards and URM is still lurking about, even though it's 2021. And I'm an old guy, I'm tired of hearing it. And but there's this question of what should we be bringing in remedial work for because we get students who are URM, et cetera, et cetera. And there's this stigma which is still there. It's going away, maybe, I don't know. But that might be one of the challenges the university has to deal with. And they shouldn't have to keep proving the point over and over again as URM that they're qualified students. And so that's one of the things that we're seeing played out in our so-called service component.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. So, yeah, more of a comment to think about and can just contribute to what you've offered, Dr. Rogers, is an easy way to document the relative hours worked is time records, which all faculty don't have to fill out. So if time records were mandatory for all faculty, we could have real data on how many extra hours do URM faculty put into for service, counseling more students, as well as extra hours in research and teaching and encounter implicit bias. And this is an interesting thing. I mean, I think that, I've been in places, and so thank you for the comment, where, tracking is this thing that you can expose some real positive trends. And then even the effort of tracking in itself is additional labor. So it becomes this really complicated thing for how you engage around that. So I didn't know if any of the panelists had a thought they wanted to add to this or comment from the group.
I did think that this, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, how is my job protected for answering this question, or it's? Well, go ahead, Lori.
You go first then. No, just kidding. Well, I was just thinking that this would, in some ways, be unfortunately, an extra burden to have to do, and I wouldn't want to do that. I was trying to think about ways to quantify it, and I think that for so many that are doing this kind of service work, there's that you are motivated by the desire to help others and all of that, and that's sort of why you do it. And I guess it would be hard to kind of quantify that, and yet I'm saying we should. So anyway, I think I could see it both ways, being laborious but yet an important way to measure it. That's all.
And we have to keep in mind that faculty are not supervised. It's like you really are running 1,000 small businesses on campus, and every one of the faculty members are little CEOs, okay? And you give me something to fill out, there's no one looking over my shoulder to see if it's even correct or not. It's just what I decided to put down that week. And that's why we see teaching, research, and service streamlined to just a few quantifiable quantities, because it's so difficult to ask each one of these shops, what are you really doing in those shops every day? And that's just the entity which you call the academy. So the academy is a very different kind of entity from other industries. And because you bring all these people on campus and you're told to open up a room up, I want you to make a lab to do whatever you want in, but make sure it's something which we're proud of at the University of Iowa. And there's no statement about your lab must be this, your lab must be that. It's whatever it is, whatever you were hired to do because you got the job. And so to appreciate what a faculty member is doing at the level of a timesheet would be wonderful, but it would require some kind of automaton to follow you around and keep track of all those hours. And it's 3 a.m. sometimes you're getting a message from a student saying they don't feel comfortable about something. Can you help me out? I'm feeling like a failure, so on and so on. And then I'm going to take the time to answer that and then say, now that goes onto my worksheet. And the minute you change that, the minute you take that attitude, that is this a value to me to answer this question, I think it spoils the fun of being a hardcore faculty and mentors. But it's something like that probably should be done. I don't know.
Absolutely, thank you. And I appreciate what, the different comments that are coming into, that are adding to what all the panelists are offering too, right? So different strategies around summary statements, things that could be connected. We have time for one more question, so I'm just gonna let that go to all of the participants. Has the pandemic made it more difficult to do outreach to K through 12? So just kind of some other pieces around service and STEM with your community.
Absolutely, and we had to cancel our K through 12 program. But if it goes on for 5 years, we'll cleverly figure out a way to do it. But like now, that's something which we are actually trying to figure out how to do K through 12 virtually. But it's not the same when you have magnets and stuff in your hand. I think that tactile responds to holding big science equipment, currents, and changes the game for someone where you actually feel like you really do belong to the scientific community. If you could be part of it versus showing you a YouTube of the Meissner effect or something. So it's you can do that anyway. So, but it has affected K through 12.
Thank you very much. Yeah, go ahead, Dr. Adams.
Well, I was just going to add something. It was just more of a joke. But as a parent for 3 kids who are in K-12, I'm doing outreach every day. I feel like trying to keep them working from home. And I do think there's some opportunity there for some home, things that you can do science at home and all of that. But so in some ways, there's been new ways of thinking about how we do outreach. And but I would say, yeah, that it is hard to replicate the hands-on experience.
Absolutely. And even though I've only spent, an hour and a half with some of you, it's clear that all of you are incredibly passionate and that the work that you're doing and the service that you're doing brings you incredible amounts of joy. So I'm sure your stories could go on for hours, and things that I hope that folks who are here and participating will reach out to you to hear some of those stories overall. And so I do just want to thank everybody so much for being here. So thank you again to Dr. Nemhard, and then to the panelists and to the planning committee for putting this together. I think that for me, I'm taking away a number of things, right? How do we think about the value and the rewards of service? How do we complicate what those actually produce or not? How do we think about inequities or imbalance with our colleagues and the work that we're doing? But I think especially, how do we engage with the complexities and curiosities that we have to really get to some of that, the big stuff, right, as we were talking about, and the really abstract things that we want to achieve. So thank you so much. I hope you continue this conversation, and just remember that you only need a heart full of grace, a soul generated by love, to be that servant. And so thank you, everyone, and hope you have a nice weekend.
Thank you.